The oil and gas industry is vital to our economy. It creates thousands of job opportunities and products that enrich our lives as Canadians. It is an exciting and progressive industry, and one which you can be proud of. But it can also be hazardous. So our industry collaborates to give you tools and training you need to work safely and effectively. And we teach you to ask questions, lots of questions. After all, our industry values you more than the oil and gas we produce. You are the most important asset we've got. Before you get to work, your industry wants to make sure you're aware of some of the basic safety standards we all follow. These safety responsibilities apply to all workers, so please pay attention and make notes if you need to. My name is Dave, and I'll be your guide for this session. And remember, this is only the first step in your safety journey. Your employer will give you a lot more detailed information when you start work. So, what do you need to know? The first thing you need to know is that safety is your responsibility as much as your employer's. You both have important rights and responsibilities. Occupational health and safety laws are there to protect you. They outline the rights and responsibilities of everyone, employers, workers, and others, at areas often called work sites. Sometimes our work sites are obvious, and sometimes they are not.
Hey Dave, a work site in Alberta can be the truck you drove to get there.
You're right, Dwayne. A vehicle can be a work site. And you have some very important responsibilities that you must be aware of. You must come to work ready and willing to work, which is often referred to as being fit for duty. Your employer expects that when you come to work, you are rested and ready to do your job safely and properly throughout your shift. Being fit for duty is one of your responsibilities. What does this mean? Well, you are required to be alert and free from the effects of alcohol and drugs. This is an important part of your responsibility to be fit for duty. As a new worker, you may be tested for alcohol and drugs. You must also be well rested and alert. Reduced levels of alertness due to fatigue may make you an unsafe worker. Make sure that you are always fit for duty. Your employer has a legal duty, too, to provide you with a safe place of work. An employer must do everything they reasonably can to protect your health and safety. This includes providing a safe work system, as well as safe facilities, tools, and work methods. So bottom line, you have the right to expect your employer to provide you with a safe place of work, and your employer has the right to expect you to use the safety systems, tools, and work methods that they provide for you, and for you to turn up for work ready to do your job. And if you think something is unsafe, you should stop what you're doing as soon as it is safe to do so and tell your supervisor or another person in charge of the worksite. If you still think it's unsafe, you should continue to discuss the unsafe conditions with your supervisor until you are satisfied that it is safe to continue working. It is important that everyone does their part. Under some laws, many employers will be required to have occupational health and safety committees or representatives. Whether your employer is required to do so will depend on what laws they must follow, and often the number of workers at that worksite. Regardless of the requirements, your industry wants you to do your part. Talk to your supervisor about safety at your worksite. In addition to the laws about worksite safety, each employer will have their own health and safety rules that you must know and follow. Some may be covered in your new hire orientation or given to you in print form. A few might even seem strange, like having to always reverse your vehicle into a parking spot, but there will be a very good reason.
Dave, it's for safe and quick evacuations during emergencies.
And because this industry has demanding jobs that require the use of specialized equipment and machinery, the company you work for will have work procedures or methods which will show you how to do your job safely. Ask your employer about the rules and procedures that will apply to you.
So, is wearing a hoodie on a job site acceptable?
You know, it depends on your employer. Some allow hoodies and some don't. Always check with your supervisor first. As an employee, you must learn and always follow the rules for the protection of yourself and others. And let's be really clear, breaking safety rules can get you fired. Now, when you first start work, you should expect a worker orientation to help you step on board. Your orientation may take place with a group of other new workers and may include watching videos, reviewing company rules and work methods, and a worksite tour. You will learn about company-specific rules and procedures and important information about your worksite. Most importantly, your supervisor should be identified to you. This person will be essential to your job and safety training. Regardless of your age or experience, you are expected to have questions and have them answered. What matters most is that you understand the rules for your worksite and that you know how to do your job and do it safely. And
if you have questions, ask.
Workers in the oil and gas industry face hazards on a daily basis, and both you and your employer are responsible for identifying hazards at your worksite. It is important that you, your supervisor, and other workers work as a team to either eliminate hazards or control them. It is not only the law, but if done properly, will keep you and your fellow workers safe. Don't be fooled into thinking that common sense will stop incidents. Knowing how to do your job and doing it safely are the keys to getting you home safe at the end of each shift. Hazard identification, or hazard IDs, are part of every employee's responsibility. Ask your supervisor how to report hazards in your workplace. And remember, if you see a potential hazard, make it safe if you can do so, and report it right away to your direct supervisor. You might help to save someone's life. Now, there are some hazards within the oil and gas industry that you need to be particularly aware of. Every worker should be aware of hydrogen sulfide gas, or H2S. It is sometimes referred to as sour gas and smells like rotten eggs. H2S can cause death to an unprotected worker in a matter of seconds. If there is the potential for exposure to it, you must receive H2S training to learn how to recognize and take precautions to prevent injury or death.
Always take H2S seriously, always follow proper procedures.
I couldn't have said it better, Rajesh. Always take H2S seriously and follow the correct procedures. Another hazard of the oil and gas industry is working alone. While different laws define working alone in different ways, you may be considered to be working alone if you work by yourself at a worksite in circumstances where assistance is not readily available when needed. If you are required to work alone, even for a few hours or a shift, ask yourself this question before you go to your worksite. How am I going to get help if I'm injured and unable to radio or call my supervisor? Your employer should have a plan that answers this. And there may be times when you're required to work in remote locations. Driving is likely to be a major component of how you make your living. Transportation incidents account for the largest number of fatalities in our industry, and collisions don't just happen, they are caused. Operating a vehicle within legal standards is not enough. You've heard it all before. Do up your seatbelt, keep your eyes on the road, put away that cell phone, and always drive to the conditions. Good defensive driving practices and road courtesy are essential to avoid collisions. Your employer will identify many other hazards during your site-specific orientation. Please pay attention, and if you don't understand something, ask. If you must wear any personal protective equipment, or PPE, your employer is usually required to train you about when PPE is necessary, what PPE is necessary, how to properly put it on, take it off, adjust it, and wear it, the safety limits of the PPE, and the proper care, maintenance, useful life, and disposal of the PPE you use. Wherever you go in the oil and gas industry, you'll see workers using similar basic personal protective equipment: a hard hat, safety glasses, hearing protection, work gloves, fire retardant coveralls, high visibility clothing, and safety footwear. Before you start work with PPE, make sure that you know how to use it and that it fits you correctly. Typically, you will look for CSA approved gear. And if you've got questions,
Dave, it's up to me to ask my supervisor.
You have the right to know about chemicals and other hazardous substances or processes used at work. The law, typically under a system known as Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System, or WHMIS, requires your employer to ensure that you have the information you need to work safely. You have the right to know where these substances or hazardous materials may be used, how you might come into contact with them, and how you are to be protected from them. Also, every controlled product container in Canada must be properly labeled so that you know what's in it. There are two types of labels: supplier container labels and workplace container labels. Supplier labels must display important hazard symbols, risk phrases, and safety information about the product so that you can easily identify the substance and know how to keep both yourself and the environment safe. If a container hasn't come from a supplier, then workplace container labels are used. Make sure that containers of hazardous materials are always identifiable with a supplier label or a workplace label, especially if it has been poured into a smaller container. And a Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS, will tell you more about the product than you can find on either the supplier or workplace label. They tell you how to safely use, store, and handle the product, and outline the emergency procedures related to that material. So make it your job to use them.
And hey, when you next walk by a container of hazardous material, stop and have a look at what it says. Make sure you're familiar with the information it contains.
And while we are talking about chemicals, let's touch on chemical spill management. As with all industrial activities, spills and releases of substances may occur even when steps are taken to prevent them. It is very important that you know what to do when dealing with a chemical spill. The steps that must be taken will depend on the type and size of the spill. There are laws that may require your employer to immediately report the spill to the government. This is an important legal requirement.
Your company should have an emergency response plan that explains how to deal with spills.
Absolutely, Mike. You must be aware of your company's policies and procedures for safely handling a spill and know who reports to the regulatory authorities. And when in doubt, stop and ask. Workplace incidents, including spills, are unplanned events. Unplanned events may include a worker injury, property damage, fire, explosion, or even a near miss, which is also known as a close call, near hit, or a no-loss incident. You must report all unplanned events to your supervisor, even minor injuries and near misses, so that steps can be taken to prevent further incidents. A minor injury may not seem important at the time, but early reporting and treatment can make sure it doesn't become a serious injury. Your employer is usually required to report worker injuries to the Provincial Workers' Compensation Board. The requirement for reporting an incident to the Occupational Health and Safety Regulator, the Environmental Regulator, and/or other applicable government agencies will depend on the laws that apply to the worksite where the incident occurred. You should make sure that you know what must be reported immediately to your supervisor at your worksite. What needs to be reported can change from province to province, and it might not be obvious to you that a minor event needs to be reported.
You're right, Dave. Don't assume that property damage or worker injury needs to occur before the matter has to be reported.
Thanks, Doug. Here's an example. If a hoist fails and no one is injured, that matter is reportable under the Saskatchewan Occupational Health and Safety Regulations when the worksite is in Saskatchewan and the employer is provincially regulated. How to report incidents will vary from company to company. The reporting procedures should be part of your safety orientation. If you're unsure about how to report an incident or what types of events are to be reported, ask your supervisor. Being ready for an emergency is an important part of any health and safety program. You must be ready to act in the event of an emergency, whether it's to report an emergency or simply escape to safety. Your employer must provide you with emergency procedures training, and the company's emergency response plan should be reviewed with you on your first day of orientation. The potential for an emergency exists at every workplace, so a specific emergency procedure may be developed for each work area. For example, there may be different procedures for work at sour wells, pipelines, maintenance shops, and offices. In addition, it is common for work sites to have a muster point.
A muster point is a safe place for everyone to gather in an emergency.
Thanks, Tracy. It is very important that you learn where the muster point is for your work site and that you understand when the emergency response plan requires you to meet there. Look for it on your first day. Without emergency response planning, even minor incidents can have serious consequences for you, your coworkers, and your employer. That's why emergency response plans need to be in place at every worksite, and you must know the role you play. If you have any questions about your company's emergency procedures, you know what to do. Any fire is a potentially catastrophic emergency on an oil and gas worksite. As a result, most worksites will have very strict rules about smoking. If you or your coworkers smoke, it is your responsibility to make sure that you smoke only in designated areas and put it out. In addition, many worksites will have restrictions on using tools and machinery that cause sparks, such as grinders and welders, in close proximity to wellheads, tanks, or anything that contains oil and gas. Again, it is your responsibility to make sure that you know the restrictions at your worksite.
If you're unsure, ask your supervisor.
Most of us are aware of the damage that fire can cause, especially when petroleum products are involved. A company's emergency response plan will describe how to deal with fire emergencies and what training you need, including the use of fire extinguishers. A fire extinguisher must be checked and maintained if it's going to work when you most need it. Emergency response practice drills allow you to develop the skills you'll need if a real emergency happens. You'll be expected to participate in drills and exercises to test the emergency response plan. These will be in situations that could actually happen at your worksite. Take them seriously and act as you would in a real emergency. By law, employers must also be prepared for a workplace medical emergency. There are rules about the number of workers who must be first aid trained, the first aid supplies that must be available at the worksite, and treatment of first aid injuries. So if your employer offers to train you in first aid, consider it an investment in your health and safety, as well as that of your coworkers and family.
It's great training to have.
So, keeping safe at work is all about you and your employer sharing important rights and responsibilities, and working together to create a workplace where safety is always important and taken seriously. This safety awareness video was created by our industry to help explain some important rights and responsibilities to you. These rights and responsibilities apply to all workers. You should always think of them as the minimum expectations. Make sure that you are familiar with them and watch this safety awareness video again if you need to. You should also have further orientations once you start work about the safety expectations and requirements of your employer. One of the most important orientation processes will be your site-specific orientation. It will tell you about hazards at your worksite and highlight important safety rules and requirements. Listen carefully and ask questions. So, our industry is calling on you to make a difference. Our industry has proven that when everyone works together, the worksite is a much safer place. So we need you to take worksite safety as seriously as we do and embrace our goal of 0 injuries. And remember, if you're unsure about your responsibilities while at work, stop and ask. That's what your industry expects of you. Welcome to the Canadian oil and gas industry.